What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of Wing and Tail Outdoors, where success is always just a commitment away. At the end of the last video, I talked about having some spring planting videos ready to go. But considering spring planting is done, fall planting is either being done now or in the next few weeks, depending on where you are in your region, I decided to mix things up a little bit. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a overview summative video, really, of what we did for the spring planting beginning to end, as well as I'm going to show you some of the results of our spring planting and how the different food plots turned out based on where they were located and the soil we had and the different things that we've done with those food plots. And then what I'm going to do after that is I will still go ahead and post those individual videos of, you know, how we did each step. But I figured where we are in the year now, it would just be a better idea to do a summary. So hang out with us for a little bit, and I'm going to share with you our entire spring planting process. So the first thing we did for our spring planting was at the end of the year last year, just before winter really set in, we took a soil sample just to get an idea of what we were working with. We took our soil sample through Whitetail Institute. We used one of Whitetail Institute's soil samples. We sent it into their lab, and honestly, on a side note, the Whitetail Institute lab is very, very responsive. They're awesome. I must have called them probably 5 or 6 times asking about different fertilizer recommendations for different blends, and every time I called in, it was either a different blend or a different species, and they were very, very accommodating, very helpful, and very willing to work with me. Never gave me any issues whatsoever, so hats off to them. So the first thing we did was we took a soil sample and we found how much lime we needed and how much fertilizer we needed for the blend that we were going to plant. So I know we talked about wanting to do no-till, but over the last 2 years we've done a little bit of planting. Didn't take a soil sample, so that was our first mistake. But over the last 2 years we've dropped roughly 5,000 pounds of lime, and our pH never really rose like we expected it to. So what we decided to do this year, and it was kind of a executive decision that we made, and we decided that in the very first planting we were going to disc our lime in, and that was done so that way we can get the lime into the soil. The lime stays where we put it rather than washing away with runoff and whatnot, and then we would get our pH to a level where we can grow our food plots faster, which would allow us to have more food sooner and really get that system going. So the first thing we did this year was we had to wait for the soil to thaw out, and unfortunately the soil didn't thaw until, I would say, late March this year, until the ground was thawed and dried enough to run a disc. So we went out that day, we dropped powdered lime and pelletized lime. We had a mix of both, and we ran the discs over most of our fields and turned that soil over. Now, the day of, literally as we were finishing that last food plot, disking it, we got a torrential downpour, and our fields turned to complete mud, which at the time I thought might have caused a little bit of an issue. But actually our food plots in those fields that we did more intensive disking in, those fields really exploded this year. So I think in hindsight, having that rain just after kind of worked in our favor, but that's not tested. That's just my personal opinion. So then after we were done with the lime and disking in the food plots, we wanted to give it some time for the weeds to grow. Now, sorry about this, backtrack real quick. Early spring, during green up, before we limed, before we started disking, as soon as those weeds started coming up, I made sure to go through them and burn them all down with glyphosate. And my number one priority this year was to try to get rid of as much weed competition as possible. And I think we succeeded. Our food plots, at least where the plots grew nice and thick, I don't really see any weeds in those food plots at all. So that worked out pretty well. So now fast forward, We did our glyphosate early spring. We put our lime in. Now, once we disked that lime in, we agitated that seed bed, and we were expecting more weeds to come up, which happened. So around June 12th, once that ground softened up again and we had really good rain in the forecast, and when I say really good rain, I mean 60% or higher for 8 out of the following 10 days. So we knew we were ready to go. That day we went out, we burned all the weeds down to the ground with glyphosate again. We allowed them to grow up, burn them down to the ground again. After we burned them down to the ground, we put Whitetail Institute's Impact on the ground, and that is a liquid pH adjuster. And it doesn't work forever, they even claim that, but it works for roughly 3 months, and it's enough to boost your pH to allow your plants to absorb the nutrients they need to grow. It's not a permanent solution. However, it's a really good product to use if you're planting something in the backwoods where it's really difficult to get a lime truck to, or to even bring a buggy to with some lime in the back. And it's also really good in our situation where we put the lime in, the lime's going to work and it's going to do its job, but in the meantime we needed to raise that pH so that way we can get stuff growing for our spring summer food plot. So that's what we did. So we went in that day, we sprayed it down with Gly, we put down our fertilizer, we put down our Impact in that order, and then lastly we put our seeds down. And all we did to do our seeds is, like I said, we're going with a no-till system. So we just went over the top, we broadcast it in. And the nice thing is we had a lot of, I wouldn't call it duff because it wasn't super thick, but we had a lot of dead grasses and dead weeds that had been burned down with the glyphosate. So, and I had weed whacked that down as well. So we had a little bit of ground cover, which I think helped a bit to keep a little bit of moisture in the ground. I wouldn't say it was a full covering like the no-till system really calls for, but that's just the way we did it this year. We had our two biggest food plots just absolutely exploded. They've done awesome this year. And it took about, I don't know, I would say within the first 3 weeks, we had some sprouts coming up, and the clover was starting to grow and the grasses were starting to grow. And I'm going to put, unfortunately, I don't have photos from every food plot for every time of the year. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a periodic week by week update photo at the end of this video for our food plots. And what you'll see is the first few weeks our cameras on one field, and then the next few weeks our cameras moved to 2 other fields, and those 2 other fields ended up growing in a lot better. Now before I go into our final, showing you what these food plots look like at the end, I want to talk to you about the blend that I used, how much I planted, and why I decided to do that. So the whole idea of no-till, the no-till system, is to allow your plants to fertilize themselves. So whatever you kill in the spring is a slow fertilizer as it's decaying on the top of the soil, and it's a slow release fertilizer, so to speak, as Dr. Grant Woods talks about on Growing Deer TV. And what we also want to do is we want to allow the plants to do the tilling for us. So you want to have roots that go deep, that go medium, and go shallow. You want things like tubers, like turnips and radishes, that are going to dig into the ground and aerate the soil for you because they're making big holes in the soil. You want things like buckwheat that go really far down and scavenge nutrients from deep in the soil. And our blend, or the blend that I used, did all of that. What I decided to do was I used Whitetail Institute products, and I mixed the no plow mixture and the destination mixture. Now I know both of those mixes are traditionally used in the fall, but the reason I like them in the spring is because it was a nice collection of legumes, grasses, broadleaves, and brassicas. So it had a little bit of everything. Plus it had the tubers, which we're going to break up some compaction, which is an issue we have in a couple of our fields. So the number one thing that we wanted to do this year is we want to start building our soil. Granted, everything we put out, we want to attract deer also, but the number one concern this year was to get the soil right, or at least start getting that soil right. And our issue is in the winter, or in our region where we are in New York, our soil doesn't reach 65 degrees until roughly June 10th. And that doesn't give us enough time to allow something like Revive, for example, from Whitetail Institute, or I believe it is the Nitrogen Boost blend from Vital Seed Company, for example. A lot of those things have soybeans, they have sorghum, which is great stuff. It's just we don't have a long enough growing season to plant those and allow it to grow enough into maturity for it to really benefit. So what I had to do was I had to find more cool season plants or blends with more cool season plants in them to serve the same purpose. So just a little background. I am, like I said in the first video, I am a math teacher, so the numbers make sense to me. So I started going down the rabbit hole. I did a little research and I came across two numbers. And one of them is called the PLS, the Pure Live Seed Percentage. And basically what that is it's just a number that's given. And let's just use 100 pounds because 100 is really easy to work with. Let's say you have a bag of 100 seeds or 100 pounds of seed, but the PLS, the Pure Live Seed Percentage, is 85%. Basically what that means is 85 pounds out of that 100 pounds is guaranteed to be pure, true, live, viable seed. That means 85 out of that 100 pounds has the potential to germinate. Then you have a germination percentage. So let's use 80% this time. So out of that 85 pounds of the 100 pounds, 80% of that 85 pounds has the ability to germinate, and that's your germination rate. So when you put those together, you get a number of how much of any product you need to plant in order to have success or to reach the recommended numbers by the USDA. So I did all this, and I'm not going to go into the numbers, but long story short, what I ended up doing was I planted 3/4 of a food plot's worth of no plow. And when I say 3/4, I mean, again, for example, let's say Whitetail Institute recommends 10 pounds of no plow. Well, 3/4 of that would be 7.5 pounds. So I planted 3/4 of an acre's worth of no plow, 3/4 of a acre's worth of destination. So in total, 1.5 of what's recommended, 1.5 acres for 1 acre, I should mention. So I planted 1.5 pounds of, 1.5 acres worth of seed, and then also added 10 pounds of buckwheat. Now, some of you may be listening and saying, wow, that's kind of crazy. You only have 1 acre, you planted enough seed for 2 acres. So what I've been using a lot, if Green Cover Seed, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the website, but Green Cover is a seed company and they sell all types of seeds, and they're dedicated to no-till. Now, that's not to say that they won't work with people who do till, because they have, and I've seen it. But they're really knowledgeable and they're really helpful. And they have a tool which is absolutely incredible on their website. It's called the Smart Mix Calculator. So essentially what I did was I took the different seeds that are in no plow and destination, and I plugged them into this Smart Mix Calculator. And then I added in the buckwheat, in weight, and I just messed with the numbers, increasing it based on the percentages from the bag. Again, this is where the numbers and the math comes into play. Long story short, when I put it into this calculator, the 3/4 of no plow, 3/4 of destination, and 10 pounds of buckwheat were right in the range of where I wanted it to be. Typically speaking, if you're gonna drill your seed in, you want to reach what they call a full seeding rate of 125. If you are broadcasting, you're leaving it on the top. Some of your seeds are going to get eaten. Some just aren't going to grow because they dry out. It happens. So they do recommend that you plant a little bit more. So I went to a full seeding rate of, I want to say 138 or 143. It was somewhere in that range. So I did go a little bit higher than I would with a seed drill, but looking back, I think it worked out fantastic. So that's essentially our entire process from beginning to end. That was, we allowed the green up to come up. We killed off the weeds early. We weed whacked that stuff down and allowed that to kind of cover the soil a little bit, give it a little bit of protection. We came back a few weeks later, we disked in our lime. We waited a few weeks, we came back to plant. On the day of planting, we sprayed down all the weeds again. We put down our fertilizer. We sprayed impact, and then we laid down our seed. And we just let the rain do the rest of the work. So coming up now, I'm going to show you some videos, and I'll have little markers or identifiers there to show you the time frame of where they were. But I'm going to show you, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so on and so forth, from the date of planting, and show you the progress of these food plots and how they grow as the weeks go on. The cool thing was the clover, the buckwheat to an extent, the kale and the radishes really started coming up right away. And I should actually say also the oats, because that's what the oats are in there for. The oats are in that mix to shoot up quickly and give the deer something to eat while everything else is growing. Same thing with the rye in those blends. But what I noticed was, while the clovers and the buckwheat and the radishes and to an extent the kale were, a foot or higher in height, our grasses were a little behind schedule, and we were a little bit worried. It wasn't until about week 6 that all of a sudden we looked back between the pictures and the grasses went from like 6 inches to 2 feet, 2.5 feet in what almost seemed overnight. So that stuff really started to explode. The triticale is really coming in nicely. That's in triticale is in one of the blends. It looks like the rye is coming up. Surprisingly, the deer are absolutely hammering the buckwheat, which I'm super surprised about. But it's okay. Everything's doing its job. We have everything growing. We have deer coming in regularly, daily, and I'll show you some of those deer also that we have coming in, which is pretty exciting. So if you stay tuned for a few minutes, I'm going to show you those. Videos or those pictures of the timeline, and I'll come back to you at the end to wrap this video up. So the first plot that we have here, we call the barbershop. There's an interesting story behind where this plot got its name from, but I'm going to include that in a future episode where I kind of give an overview of the entire property. But as you can see, this plot did not grow very well. It's probably the worst plot that we have this year. And that is due to us not clearing out the leaves before putting the seed down. So if any of you are making wood plots, please make sure that you clear those leaves. Last year we had it hopping, but there wasn't a lot of leaves on the ground. So for the fall, we're going to go ahead and fix that. The next plot here is our power line field. And in our spring planting videos, there's quite a bit of footage of us putting down the fertilizer, the seed, and disking and whatnot. This is one of our two best plots. It's exposed to sun all day long, which I think serves to why it's growing so well. But you can see everything here is popped, and we're only at 56 days right now. So there's still, I believe, another 36 days until most of these reach maturity. Some of these plants take about 120 days to mature, so we're on track for full maturity if we let it keep going. The third plot up here is what we call the old cabin field. This plot also grew very well, and along with the power line, it was one of the two original spots that we started planting the very first year we had this property. So what I believe happened is these are the two places that have gotten the most lime And I think the lime has had enough time to get into the ground and start taking effect that these plots are a little bit ahead of the others. So in my opinion, I believe that's why these are growing so nicely. And this plot is right on par with the power line. So we're very happy with these two. The fourth plot up here is the plot that we like to call the orchard. And this area was cleared out for us last year with an excavator, which we believe caused some compaction. That, along with the fact that it's only been planted twice and it's only gotten lime twice, we just believe that it needs a little bit more time for the soil to get to where we want it to. And it's improved with every planting. And where the things are growing right now, they're growing pretty nicely. So we have full expectations of this plot to continue to improve, and we look forward to seeing what it looks like for the fall. Lastly, we have the area that we call the new cabin. And this is the area where the cabin that used to be on this property was buried about 15 feet deep, I believe. So when all that soil got put in, it got packed down and rolled over, and this area is extremely, extremely compacted. It is full of rocks, it is full of shale, it is full of pebbles and whatnot. So this area took a very long time to pop. It is the very last fields to have any green up, any sprouting. But now, where it's growing nicely. So we're just going to keep planting this and allow those roots to break up that soil and to continue improving the soil for us. So this food plot, we're looking forward to improving as time goes on. All right, so as you can see, we have some food plots that are growing amazing. We have other food plots that are kind of and we have one that, my own fault, we forgot to rake the leaves out when we put the seed down, and not a whole lot of those seeds made it through that layer of leaves. So it is what it is. We're gonna fix that in the fall planting. As you can see through those videos, also in the beginning things started off a little slow, and with this really being the first year that we really dug our feet in and did this seriously, there was a little bit of concern going on in the beginning. Things started popping, but they never really exploded. And that's what we've seen over the last 2 years in this acre that we've been planting. But once we kind of calmed down and we decided to trust the process, we really saw those results start to come around week 4. Like I said earlier, the grasses took a little bit longer to pop, but now we're almost at week 8, I would say. And we have some grasses that are over the deer's back and growing now, which is awesome. What that's going to allow us to do is crimp all of that over the seed that we're going to put down this coming weekend. And that's really going to help protect the seed, protect the soil from the sun. It's going to hold moisture in and really give those seeds the best opportunity that they have to grow this year. As I just hinted a few moments ago, this next video coming up is going to be our fall planting. This coming Sunday, we're going to get up to the property and we're going to go through our entire fall planting process. We're going to be using the same blend that we used in the spring. As I said, those blends really are designed to be used in the fall. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to use that in the fall. We're not quite sure if we want to do a full kill yet, or if we only want to do a partial kill just to ensure that we still have stuff growing. But we're going to talk about that in the next video. I want to thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Wing and Tail Outdoors. Join us next week for our episode on fall liming. If you like what you see, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and if there's any questions you have or anything you want to see on a future video, please leave a comment below or just say hi. Again, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next week on Wing and Tail Outdoors, where success is just a commitment away. Have a great week, ladies and gentlemen.